You may proceed, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Flaa, just a clarification, please. You indicated the unit that you were assigned to at the time that you left the sheriff's office was what again?
That was the microphone, please.
How's this?
Turn it on.
How's this? The unit that you were assigned to at the time you left the sheriff's office was which again?
The Vice and the Intelligence Unit.
Was that the unit that you were in at the time that this referral came into the office back on the 20th of February of 2003?
No, sir.
What unit were you attached to at that time?
At that time I was a detective assigned to the Criminal Investigations Division.
All right. Now, you told us that when this came in, you had a conversation with Brenda Blackburn from the Department of Child and Family Services in Los Angeles.
Yes, sir.
Did you have a conversation with anybody else?
Yes, I did.
With whom?
David Arvizo.
All right. Who did you understand David Arvizo to be?
To be the father of the Arvizo siblings.
Did you make a determination as to whether or not the children should be interviewed by the Sheriff's Department, Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department, by you or some other designated detective?
After the interview with CWS.
Yes, that's right. After CWS indicated to you that they had already done the interview.
We had made a determination that an interview would not be necessary.
Was there any information that was given to you that there was a disclosure of child sexual abuse at all?
No, no information.
And was there any further investigation conducted by the sheriff's office at that time?
No, there was not.
Was the investigation closed at that time?
Yes, it was.
The date of the interview with Miss Blackburn was what date now?
March 10, 2003.
And when was your interview with Mr. Arvizo?
March 13, 2003.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Oh, excuse me. One last question. Did you make a report of this?
Yes, I did.
And did you indicate in your report the date that the referral came in and the date of your interviews?
I indicated the date that I received the referral.
And the date of your interview with Miss Blackburn?
Yes, sir.
All right. And did you also include with it the copy of the tape that you had of the interview with Miss Blackburn?
Yes, I booked that in as evidence.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examine.
Officer Flaa, is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Sanger.
First of all, you were with the Sheriff's Department for 8.5 years, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And what was the date that you terminated your services with the Sheriff's Department?
It was in the beginning of January, 2004. I don't recall the specific. I think it was like January 2nd, that week.
Now, you have told us that you went to the Santa Maria Police Department, right? That's where you are now.
Yes, sir.
Did you not like your job as a detective in the Intelligence and Vice Division?
Yes, I did.
You liked it. Okay.
Uh-huh.
You filed a report, as you've just told us, saying that you found there was no criminal activity in this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you filed that report on April the 16th, right?
Correct.
You were aware that at some time later, there was a further investigation of this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, did you continue on in your capacity as a detective at the Sheriff's Department until you transferred or until you quit and went on to the Santa Maria Police Department?
Two different type of positions. I believe it was March of 2003, mid-March. I think it was like March 20, 2003 is when I ended my tenure as a detective assigned to the Criminal Investigations Division and had the opportunity to assume the role as an undercover role with my Vice and Intelligence Unit.
Okay. When this investigation was re-established, do you know when it was re-established?
No.
Did you forward any documents, for instance, to Detective Zealous?
Any documents?
Did you furnish any report to Detective Zealous?
They had my original report. I did not personally hand them a copy of the report.
So you were not assigned to continue the investigation that you started in this case, is that correct?
That's correct.
And Detective Zealous started his investigation about June the 13th, is that right?
I don't know when he started it.
Roughly sometime in June, is that your understanding, or you don't know at all?
I do not know what date the investigation commenced.
What year are you referring to, counsel?
2003. Alright, let's go back to the source of the referral in this case. You indicated you received a referral from 2 different places, is that right? Or 2 different referrals. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
And the information for those referrals came from 2 different places, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
And you reviewed the referral documents, is that right?
Yes, I did.
And the referral documents were from the Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services, correct?
Yes, sir.
And they called at the DCFS.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
My understanding.
And that's sort of like what we call CPS here in Santa Barbara County.
Or CWS. They changed it. Child Welfare Services.
So CPS, or now CWS, that's what we call it. They call it DCFS.
My understanding, yes.
So you received the reports, the 2 reports, that were entitled, Suspected Child Abuse Report, is that correct?
Yes.
And the first report was actually generated by a Carol Lieberman, is that your understanding? Do you want to look at the report?
If I may, yes.
Yes. And I believe you attached these 2 reports to your narrative report, did you not?
I did.
Okay, I think it's page 10 might help you.
Okay, yes, I see that.
Alright, now, let me just stop there for a moment and talk about your qualifications. You went to the academy, post-academy, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the post-academy is a certification for an academy that can give training to, official training to people who are going to become law enforcement officers in the state of California, is that correct?
Yes.
Which post-academy did you go to?
I attended Allen Hancock College's academy.
Alright, and they have an official academy there. People can go there, learn to be police officers, and get a certification so that they can apply for the job, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in the course of the academy, you take courses in investigation, is that correct?
Yes.
You take courses in report writing.
Yes.
And you basically learn how to take a case from the initial part of an investigation through as far as a police officer would take it, is that right?
The basic, yes.
Now, since your academy training, you also had other in-service training, is that correct?
Yes.
And as of 2000, February, March of 2003, how much in-service training had you had?
Would you like me to list the various types of training specific to this type of casework?
That would be fine.
Okay. I attended a 40-hour sexual assault investigators course, a 24-hour child forensic interview course, an 80-hour homicide course that touched on, sexual assault abuse aspects of homicide, as well as in-service training. There's been some 8-hour courses here and there for different aspects of this type of investigation.
And as a police officer, or, strike that, as a deputy sheriff, before becoming a detective in the sheriff's department, did you have occasion to investigate cases related to child abuse?
Yes.
And then when you became a detective, did you have occasion to investigate additional cases?
Yes, I did.
And how long were you a how long were you a detective as of March of 2003?
4 years. Roughly 4 years.
Okay, so suffice it to say, you were an experienced detective with regard to suspected child abuse cases, is that correct?
Yes, I would say.
And when you were assigned this case, you were aware, of course, that we were talking about the entertainer Michael Jackson, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were aware that there had been a good deal of media attention given to Mr. Jackson immediately preceding the time that you started your investigation, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, now, we're going back to that question about Carol Lieberman. As an experienced child abuse investigator, when you have when you have a reporting party, is it of interest to the investigator to know who the reporting party is?
Yes.
Okay, and in your department, in the sheriff's department, did you call the reporting party an RP?
Yes.
Okay, So the RP, the reporting party, is often what starts an investigation. Somebody calls in, they're an RP, and that starts your investigation, correct?
Correct.
Particularly in child abuse, suspected child abuse cases, knowing a good deal about the reporting party is generally useful to the investigation, correct?
That is correct.
People may have all sorts of agendas when they call in a child abuse report, is that right?
Excuse me, yes, that's correct.
I think there's some water there, if you want to.
Thank you.
In this particular case, did you determine who Carol Lieberman was?
No.
Were you aware that she has never met Michael Jackson?
No.
Were you aware that she never met Michael Jackson's children?
If I may, regarding that referral.
Yes.
My investigative responsibility was not specifically this referral. It would have been, the other would have been within our jurisdictional responsibility.
Well, we're going to get to the other in a second.
So here, you know, I did not conduct any formal investigation into that referral's accusations.
Okay, now, I don't mean to argue with you, but I believe on direct you did say you had 2 referrals when you started your investigation, right?
There were 2 referrals that came in, yes, sir.
And you knew this was an important case to investigate carefully, correct?
Right.
And one of the referrals was from Carol Lieberman.
Yes.
Right. Now, I understand what you just said about the second one, which we'll get to. But I'm asking you if you did any investigation on Carol Lieberman.
No, sir.
Did you Google her name? Run it on the internet?
Your Honor, I'll object. The witness has said he did not do an investigation of that referral.
Sustained.
Okay, well, let me ask you, are you saying you did no investigation whatsoever with regard to this report?
Which report? Vague.
Sustained.
That's fine. Let me rephrase it. You indicated you had 2 referrals. And the first one was from Carol Lieberman, right?
I indicated there were 2 referrals had come in from DCFS, yes.
So my question is, what, if anything, did you do with regard to the first referral?
The one where you have stated Carol Lieberman's the RP.
Right.
Okay, nothing.
You read it.
Oh, I apologize. Yes, I read the referral when it came in.
Okay, and did you consider it as you conducted your investigation?
No.
So as far as you were concerned, this had no significance whatsoever.
No, this would have been under CWS's, Child Welfare Services, jurisdictional responsibility, not mine, per se, based on the information in the referral.
And as an investigator, you didn't think it was significant to find out who was making the referral, why there was even a referral there.
Not for that specific referral.
Okay, now, the second referral that you talked about is also attached to your reports, is that correct?
That's correct.
So we're talking about the same thing here. And the second referral, this is the one you're saying now was the focus of your investigation.
Yes.
And in this referral, let me withdraw that. This referral comes from a director or somebody in the administration of the LA School District, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in the referral, the DCSF people indicate that the attorney Gloria Allred had complained to Santa Barbara County officials regarding the Bashir tape, is that correct? Second to the last paragraph, page 15.
Yes.
Okay, and do you know who Gloria Allred is?
Yes.
She's a lawyer in Los Angeles, is that correct?
That's correct.
Tends to get on television a lot, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, and she has, in the course of your investigation, you determined she had absolutely no first-hand information whatsoever with regard to Michael Jackson or any of this, is that correct?
I did not attempt to make that type of determination.
Alright, so the second report basically was a revelation by the school district that they had a belief that the people in the Bashir film were students in the LA Unified School District, is that correct?
Correct.
And they identified the people by name. That is, Gavin and Star Arvizo, is that correct?
That's correct.
Alright, now, when you reviewed these 2 reports, let me withdraw that. Other than these 2 reports, did you have any other information to commence your investigation?
No.
Alright. Did you talk with Mr. Sneddon about the case?
No, I did not.
Did you talk to any other people in your department about the case?
Yes.
Now, you talked to Lieutenant Klapakis, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright. And in the course of talking to Lieutenant Klapakis, you and he decided that you should attempt to interview the children, Gavin and Star Arvizo. Is that right?
Actually, that conversation would have been between my immediate supervisor at the time, who was Sergeant Legault, and myself. We had that conversation. We have a chain of command to follow, and Lieutenant Klapakis was Sergeant Legault's supervisor. All of ours, but within that chain of command.
Alright, so let's pin this down a little bit. Did you talk to Lieutenant Klapakis yourself about interviewing the children?
I do not recall if I specifically spoke to Lieutenant Klapakis directly. I know that most of my communications were with Sergeant Legault. So, and understand, their offices are right next to each other. My desk was virtually in earshot of both offices, so he very well could have been party to one of the conversations.
Okay, so you would see, at the time, in February and March and April of 2003, you would see Lieutenant Klapakis on a regular basis, correct?
Correct.
Alright, do you recall testifying at the grand jury in this case?
I do.
Do you, by any chance, have your grand jury testimony there in front of you?
I do.
Let me just ask you to do this. Why don't you take a look at your testimony? You're welcome to read the whole thing if you'd like. I'm going to ask you to direct your attention to pages 1440, starting at about line 20, going through 1441, line 16. And I'm going to ask you to just read that to yourself and see if that refreshes your recollection as to whether or not you talked to Lieutenant Klapakis directly.
You said line 20 on page 1440.
1440, start there. But you can start wherever you want, but that's where I'd like you to focus on. And going on to the next page.
Okay.
Alright, does that refresh your recollection that you had talked with Lieutenant Klapakis about interviewing the children?
Like I said, in reading that, it doesn't say I specifically told Lieutenant Klapakis. I know that the decisions that I was informed of were handed down by Lieutenant Klapakis, my supervisor. And, understand, please, that Sergeant Legault is within that chain of command.
Alright.
So.
Well, in any event, if Legault was there. In other words, you can't tell us for sure whether you heard directly from Klapakis or not. It may have gone through Legault, is that correct?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Alright, so when you said at the grand jury, it was during that time that Lieutenant Klapakis had advised us that he contacted LACPS. That could have meant that Lieutenant Klapakis told you directly, or told Sergeant Legault, or told both of you.
That's correct. However, I'm not reading. I don't see what you just said.
1441, lines 12 through 14.
It could very well have been where Sergeant Legault and I were together, yes.
Now, the point of this.
I'm sure there's one.
There is a point, I hope. The point of this is at some point, either directly through Klapakis or through Legault, among the three of you at some point it was determined that you should interview these children, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then at some point, Lieutenant Klapakis said he contacted Los Angeles CPS, right?
I was informed that he had contacted CPS, yes.
Okay, and when we say LACPS, we're really meaning LADCFS, right?
Yes, we are.
Those are kind of used interchangeably by Santa Barbarans.
I believe it's the same type of agency.
Alright, so the first point is, you were told that Lieutenant Klapakis contacted the LADCFS, right?
Yes, sir.
And you were told that he instructed them, or had them interview the children. Is that what you were told?
I was told that he had submitted a request to them to interview the children.
Now, and then you found out that, in fact, they did interview the children.
I did, yes.
Because that's what the DCFS worker read to you over the phone.
Correct.
Okay, were you aware that Lieutenant Klapakis, in fact, called the DCFS supervisor and told her not to interview the children?
Yes.
And, in fact, the DCFS supervisor said, "You're too late, we already did it."
Yes.
Okay, now, let me withdraw that. You You then relied upon the DCSF workers as to the contents of their interview with the children. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you also relied upon them, as fellow professionals, to have done a fairly thorough job in interviewing the children. Is that correct?
That would have been my hope, yes.
And, in fact, what they told you was very detailed. They had asked a lot of very detailed questions of the children and the mother, Janet Arvizo. Is that correct?
I can only tell you what Brenda Blackburn informed me, what she read to me in that report. As far as what exact exchange occurred between the interviews and the children, I do not know. I was not present.
I understand that. But as the lead investigator on this case involving Mr. Michael Jackson and these allegations, you were at that time concerned that there had been a thorough interview. Is that right?
I was concerned that there had been.
In other words, if you had felt there wasn't a thorough interview, if you felt that, they'd done a drive-by or got on the phone for a minute and said, it's close enough, you would have said, no, that's not sufficient. We need to do a further interview. Either they do or we do, right?
Me personally, yes. But you have to understand, in this situation those decisions were not being made by me as the lead investigator. They were being made by Lieutenant Klapakis or the administration.
Okay.
So I was informed that they had interviewed the children. She read me the content of what supposedly that interview, what transpired during that interview. And we had to go on, based on that.
Now, when you say, we had to go on that, let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
You were the lead investigator in this case, correct?
I was the assigned investigator, yes.
Assigned investigator. And in your department, you call it assigned investigator, is that?
Lead investigator is a term that's commonly used.
Okay, lead investigator. I just want to use the right words. Okay. This will come up again, and we can spend less time with another witness if we just explore this.
Okay.
As lead investigator, it's your understanding, in any case if you're lead investigator, you're responsible to collect all the evidence and make sure all the reports are written, and submit the case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Alright, now, you have a chain of command.
Yes.
Right. And in the chain of command at that particular time, in your direct chain of command, you had Sergeant Legault and you had Lieutenant Klapakis, right?
Correct.
The people in the chain of command who are above you in the chain of command can give you instructions and orders. Is that correct?
That's correct.
However, it is expected and was expected, in February, March and April of 2003, that any lead investigator on a case take full responsibility for evaluating the evidence and making appropriate recommendations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Alright, and after you heard from Miss Blackburn, let me withdraw that. You heard from Miss Blackburn that there were, in fact, 3 social workers who went to the home. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that they talked to, not only to Star Arvizo and Gavin Arvizo, but they talked to their sister Devellin, and they also talked to the mother, Janet. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Alright, and after you received that information, you then talked to the father of the children. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was David Arvizo.
That's correct.
And he told you that he had been subject to a restraining order, so he hadn't been able to talk with his children for a period of time. Is that correct?
Yes.
But he also said that he had been.
I'm going to object as hearsay.
Sustained.
In general, he told you the background.
I'm going to object as hearsay.
Sustained.
Alright, it's not offered for the truth. It's offered with regard to his opinion.
Sustained.
Okay. In any event, after you talked to David Arvizo, did you make a recommendation to your superiors that any further investigation occur in this case?
That was the final conclusion, yes.
The final conclusion was that no further investigation.
Correct. No further investigation.
So you did not make a recommendation to your superiors that there be further investigation?
Not at that time, based on the information we had received.
And, in fact, your conclusion in your report was that there was no criminal activity. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Sanger.
Yes.
If I can clarify something, you kind of provided a broad time frame when you said February, March, April. And in fact, And then you talked about that no crime occurred within that time frame. That's not what I'm stating, nor is that what my report states. It was as of the interview on February 20th. I cannot account for what happened, what may have been said by any of the Arvizos after the interview with DCFS.
See, I was going to sit down, but now I have to ask you some more questions.
I'm sorry, I needed to clarify that, because that was a very broad 3-month time frame.
That's fine. You submitted your report April 16th, is that correct?
If I may look at the face page.
Yes, please.
Yes, that's when I took it to the supervisor for approval.
And the referral that you had, as an experienced child abuse investigator, the material you had suggested that a child abuse investigation be commenced, is that correct?
Yes.
And the information that you had from DCFS, you're telling us, was as of February 20th, is that correct?
The date of the interview.
That was the...
Yes.
That was the information you had from them. You understood it took place on February 20th.
Yes.
And then you had information March 13th from an interview with David Arvizo, correct?
I had spoken to Mr. Arvizo on that date, yes.
So as of the time that you submitted your report, you had no evidence of criminal activity, is that correct?
Based on, yes.
I understand. But you were assigned the case, and if you thought there was some reason to investigate beyond the reports that you received from Miss Blackburn and Mr. Arvizo, you would have done that, right?
Correct.
All right, okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Just a couple, Your Honor. Just a moment of clarification, if I could, Officer Flaa. There were 2 referrals that came in. And the first one you said you did no investigation on. That was the referral of which, please?
That was the referral where the reporting party indicated that they were aware of emotional abuse by Mr. Jackson toward his children.
All right. Who handled that referral? Where did that one go to?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
If he knows.
Well, the foundation is sustained.
All right. Do you know what becomes of different referrals? In other words, how they're distributed through the investigative bodies and agencies in Santa Barbara County?
Yes.
Okay. And how are they distributed?
Well, a referral such as that, where there's no apparent criminal on the surface, and there's no criminal accusations per se, and it's an in-home abuse situation, would be referred out to Child Welfare Services, and they would assume jurisdictional responsibility for that type of investigation.
And did that happen as to the first referral?
That I do not know.
All right. But it was not a referral that went. In other words, the copy that you received was simply a copy. This was a referral to Child Protective Services.
Correct.
Objection. Leading. Your Honor, and compound.
Sustained.
Tell us about the report that you received. Was it an original or was it a copy?
It was a copy.
To whom was it addressed, then?
I don't know. I was given a copy by Lieutenant Klaa, or Sergeant Legault.
In any event, your investigation was limited to the second referral.
Yes, sir.
And that involved which children? Identify them, please.
Yes. Gavin Arvizo, Star Arvizo, and then, I know that I'm going to mispronounce this, Develian, I believe it is. Develian Arvizo.
That's close.
Okay.
All right. The dates that we're talking about, please. You already told us that it was the 20th when the interview was done in Los Angeles, the 20th of February, 2003. And the date that you said you had your conversation with Miss Blackburn was the 11th of March, 2003.
March 10, 2003.
I'm sorry, March 10, 2003. When was it determined that the investigation would be closed?
After my conversation with Mr. Arvizo.
And that was?
March 13, 2003.
And you had briefed your supervisor, Sergeant Legault, of your findings, is that correct?
Yes.
And that included a copy of the tape-recorded copy of the conversation with Miss Blackburn?
Correct.
Did the sheriff's office ever receive, to your knowledge, while you were handling this matter, the actual written report of the Child Protective Services? The Department of Child and Family Services report that was generated in Los Angeles with regards to their interview of these 2 children, or 3 children?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Sanger.
We've talked about this timeline. And again, we're starting with you here, so I'm going to ask you to take a look at a piece of paper. And with the court's permission, I'll give one to counsel here. With the court's permission, I'd like to approach the witness and...
All right.
Do you have a pen?
This is shown for refreshment of memory.
No. What I'm going to do is ask that the piece of paper that I've given the witness be marked as defense next in order, which is 50.
34.
5034. And hopefully this will help avoid confusion, but we'll see. First of all, officer, do you recognize that as being a timeline, just generally a linear calendar?
A blank timeline.
Blank timeline, yes. And, all right. What I'm going to do is just ask you. Mr. Zonen was asking you some questions about the timing on.
Sure.
Redirect there. So let's just get it on paper. First of all, if you'd put your name up on the top. There's a line that says, witness. And then you can indicate on the timeline when you received your referral.
Circle the date.
Yeah, just right. Perhaps above it, just received referral. Whatever will help us to see this. And then you can circle the date and right above it the date that you understood the DCFS interview took place. You told us you understood that was on the 20th, I believe. Is that right?
It was actually the same date that I got the...
Okay. Then just put DCFS interview as well. And then indicate the date that you contacted David Arvizo. And then just before that I think is the date you actually spoke to the DCFS supervisor, which I believe you said was on the 10th.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then I believe you indicated that there was a date that you found out that the Arvizo children had already been interviewed. I don't think you told us the date. But was that on 2/24?
Yes, it was.
Why don't you just indicate that on there? And then off that particular chart, you have the date of April 16th, which is the date you wrote your report. Is that correct? That's off the chart, so it would be at the end. Would you just make a note, an arrow or something, and just put 4/16? Is that chart now illustrative of your testimony? Does that work for you?
As far as the timeline, yes.
Pretty much tell us about the timeline.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, in fact, perhaps Deputy Avila could just bring that back with her so I don't have to approach, if that's all right.
I figured you were going to say that.
May I see that, please?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I'd move this into evidence.
No objection.
It's admitted.
I'd like to publish it, if I could, please. Would Your Honor hit the...
We need input 4, right?
Pardon my scribbling.
Aha, there's my hand. Oops. We have 5034 on the screen there. And somebody had a laser pointer, but I don't know where it is. But I think this is simple enough, and let's just do it this way. You've indicated they're just what we went over. The date that you got the request, or the referral, on the 20th of February, 2003, which is also, it turns out coincidentally, to be the date of the DCFS interviews, correct?
That's correct.
And then you were told of, actually, I can't read it. What's on the 24th?
It says, Detective Flaa learned of the interview, or the DCSF interviews.
Thank you. That's when you learned of the interviews. And on the 10th of March, that's when you basically were read the interviews by Miss Blackburn. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then the 13th is when you did your interview with Mr. David Arvizo, correct?
Correct.
And then down at the bottom, it's off the chart, but April 16th, 03 is when you submitted your report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
I have no questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We'll call Lieutenant Klapakis to the stand.
When you get to the witness stand, remain standing. Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Jeff Klapakis. It's KLA, P as in Paul, AKIS.
Thank you.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Sir, what is your current occupation?
I'm a lieutenant with the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office.
What is your responsibilities, your current assignment?
I am in charge of the Criminal Investigations Bureau within the North County of Santa Barbara.
We have to admonish everybody that that microphone has to be pretty close to your mouth to be heard anywhere, if you would, please.
Okay.
What does that mean? What are your actual assignments and responsibilities? What do you do as part of your job?
Any reports of criminal activity are sent to my bureau, and they are sent out to detectives to further investigate them.
And who works under you? Who do you supervise?
I supervise sergeants, who then supervise other detectives.
All right. Were you involved in any of the decisions regarding the referrals that came in back in February 2003 regarding Mr. Jackson, specifically involving children of the Arvizo family, as well as the second referral involving his own children?
Yes.
What was your involvement in that?
I received the referrals and contacted our local office of the Child Protective Services, in hopes of making contact with the Los Angeles Office of Child Protective Services, which I believe is called DCFS.
All right. Was this assigned to an investigator?
Yes.
And who was the investigator?
Detective Flaa.
Do you know when that investigation took place?
Yes. It was around the 2nd or 3rd week of February. I believe it was February 18th or the 20th, somewhere in there.
Did you at any time place a telephone call to any agency, child protective agency, specifically in Los Angeles?
Well, I first contacted Lompoc, in hopes of getting in touch with Los Angeles.
Why Lompoc?
Well, they were our local office. We had worked with them before in similar type cases. The referrals indicated that the potential person involved in the referral lived in Los Angeles, so I thought that might be the more prudent action.
All right, let me ask it again. I'm not sure I understand. Why Lompoc? If the person lived in Los Angeles, why did you contact the Lompoc office as opposed to the Santa Maria office or Santa Barbara office?
Well, I thought that they would have contact numbers for them. They may know some people that we could contact. And much like I would call a law enforcement agency, having contact with them, that's why I chose to go through them first.
All right. And was that before or after you assigned Detective Flaa to this investigation?
That was before.
All right. Did you contact Child Protective Services in Los Angeles at all? Did you have any communication with them?
Yes, I believe I did. Sometime after the 20th.
Did you at any time instruct them that they should not interview the Arvizo children?
I actually made that call to Lompoc CPS and hoped, because I had not gotten a phone number for LA at that point in time. We're talking about a period of a couple of days.
Okay.
And I believe that was on February 20th.
All right.
At about 11 o'clock.
All right. So the question specifically is, did you tell somebody in some child protective organization not to interview the children?
Yes, I did.
Who was the organization?
Lompoc.
Why did you instruct them accordingly?
At that point in time, I had discussed it with Detective Flaa and then Sergeant Legault, and we felt it would be more prudent for us to go down and conduct the interview ourselves.
All right. It was in deference to your doing the interview or you having one of your detectives doing the interview?
Right.
At some point in time, did you make the determination or did somebody from your office make the determination not to do an interview at all?
Yes, I did.
And when was that decision made?
After Detective Flaa had contacted the Los Angeles office of the DCFS and was able to extract their information on their investigation, that they had closed their investigation.
Were you familiar, or were you made familiar with the information that was furnished to Detective Flaa by the Child Protective Services Agency in Los Angeles?
Yes, I was.
Did he actually tape record that conversation?
Yes.
Did you listen to that tape recording?
I read the transcript, I believe.
A transcript was prepared at that time?
Yes.
All right. Are we still talking back in February and March of 2003?
It was March 2003.
All right. So you became aware of that interview in its entirety, the interview between Detective Flaa and Brenda Blackburn of the Department of Child Family Services in Los Angeles.
That's correct.
The two different names has plagued us from the beginning of this case, hasn't it?
Right.
When was it that you made the determination, strike that? Were you the one who made the determination not to pursue an investigation any further?
Yes.
All right. When was that decision made?
After we had talked with Miss Blackburn, and also after I instructed Detective Flaa to contact the estranged father of the boy.
And his name is?
David Arvizo.
All right. At some point in time was this investigation reactivated?
Yes.
All right. Without getting into the detail of the conversations, what was the event that caused it to be reactivated?
I received a phone call from Larry Feldman.
All right. And did that cause you to pursue other investigation at that point?
Yes.
Was an investigative team assembled at that time?
Yes.
And who was the lead investigator selected at that time?
Sergeant Steve Robel.
When was that done, do you recall? The conversation with Larry Feldman.
I believe it was late June or early July 2003.
Did Mr. Feldman tell you why he was contacting you?
Yes.
And what did he say?
He indicated that the young boy and his brother had talked to a Dr. Katz in Los Angeles, and that they had made some.
I'm going to object to a narrative, and it's calling for hearsay.
I'm going to withdraw the question and rephrase it.
All sustain the objection and strike the answer.
Thank you.
Did you refer him at any time to Child Protective Services, Mr. Feldman?
I don't believe so.
Did he indicate to you that he had contacted Child Protective Services?
That would call for hearsay.
Sustained.
Did he tell you who referred you to him? Who referred him to you?
Mr. Sneddon.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Cross-examine.
Lieutenant, how are you?
Fine, sir.
You originally, let me withdraw that. You said you had called the Lompoc CPS, Child Protective Services, right?
Yes.
And is that the Child Protective Services office that would have jurisdiction over the Santa Ynez Valley?
I believe so.
Okay. Mr. Jackson, Michael Jackson, my client, has a ranch in Santa Ynez Valley, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were aware of that at the time, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you discuss with the CPS people in Lompoc doing an investigation of either of the suspected child abuse reports that came from Los Angeles?
Yes, I believe we did discuss the referrals.
So there were 2 referrals, right?
Yes.
We're going to refer to the first one. Not that they have any priority, I suppose. But the first one was a referral in which the reporting party was Carol Lieberman, is that correct?
I believe that was the first one.
And you are aware that Carol Lieberman was a psychologist who was getting a lot of time on television around that time, is that correct?
I wasn't aware of her prior to receiving the referral.
After you received the referral, did you make that determination, that she had been becoming a television personality over complaints about Michael Jackson?
Well, I believe the referral indicated that she planned to have a news conference.
In fact, she did.
I'm unaware of that.
She was even alerting everybody that she was going to have, on a particular date, I think it was a day or 2 after, she was going to have a news conference, right?
I'm going to object as assuming facts not in evidence and lack of foundation.
I'll withdraw it. We can look at the report if that would help. Okay. The report indicated that actually Miss Lieberman, the next day, the following day, the day following her report, intended to have a press conference. Is that correct?
I believe that's what it indicates. I'm not looking at it right now.
Okay. You're welcome to do that. I can show you a copy of that.
I believe I have one.
Do you have it?
Yes.
Please take a look.
Yes, it does say the next day.
All right. And how long have you been a sheriff?
25 years.
All right. And without going into all the detail, you went to the academy.
Yes.
Which academy?
Allen Hancock.
All right. You got a good education there, is that right?
Yes.
And you've had a lot of in-service training since then, is that correct?
Yes.
And you've investigated suspected child abuse reports on many occasions in your career as a deputy sheriff and as a detective and eventually on up the ladder, is that correct?
Primary aspects of it, yes.
And you're well aware that the nature of the report including who the reporting party is a significant factor to evaluate in a suspected child abuse case. Is that correct?
I believe you take the totality of any circumstances.
But specifically the RP, an RP can have an agenda, right?
Yes, they can.
Okay, and in the second report, there's also reference to Gloria Allred. Is that correct?
That same report.
The second suspected child abuse report from LADCFS.
Are you referring to the one that the reporting party was a Mr. Tash?
That's correct.
Yes, she's mentioned in that.
Alright, and you're aware that Gloria Allred is an LA lawyer who spends a lot of time on television, correct?
Yes, I'm aware of Miss Allred.
And from your understanding of these reports, none of the reporting parties had any personal knowledge of Michael Jackson or his involvement with his own children or other children. Is that correct?
Personal knowledge, no.
Okay, now, do you know if Santa Barbara Child Protective Services, that being evidently the Lompoc CPS office, do you know if they did anything to follow up on an investigation of either one of these reports?
I believe that when they received the referral, and I believe it was the first one, they sent it to LADCFS, because the boy lived in Los Angeles.
Alright, now, the first referral, though, was with regard to, from Carol Lieberman was with regard to Mr. Jackson and his own children. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, maybe I have that mistaken. It's one of them. I think that they made contact with LA because, probably after the second one.
So the first report, just based on what you were telling Mr. Zonen, the first report would be within their jurisdiction if there was anything there to investigate. Is that correct?
Santa Barbara County.
Yes.
Yes, it would, based on where Mr. Jackson lives.
Alright, and if there was any criminal activity related to that first report, that would be within the jurisdiction of the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, particularly your office in Santa Maria for the North County. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Alright, now, I do want to try to clear up one point here. I think you said that you asked the Lompoc CPS office not to interview Starr and Gavin Arvizo.
My recollection is that I made contact with Lompoc to either give me a number to contact Los Angeles or to pass the request to Los Angeles. But I was advised that I was too late.
Okay, do you recall speaking directly with Miss Blackburn in Los Angeles and asking her not to interview the children?
It's possible that I did talk to Miss Blackburn in person, yes.
Do you recall her telling you, it's too late? We already interviewed them.
I did receive that information. Who I received it from, I can't tell you right now.
Okay, alright. Now, in your experience as an investigator or detective and eventually, can we say, an administrator, or is that not a good thing to say?
That's fair.
So in your experience as a lieutenant and everywhere on the way up, you understood this to be a sensitive case. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you understood it to be potentially a big case, significant case, correct?
Yes.
When Detective Flaa concluded his investigation, did he inform you that it was his opinion that no further investigation was necessary?
I believe that we collaborated on it, discussing it, yes.
So you talked with him?
And Sergeant Legault. Right.
So basically all three of you agreed that no further investigation was necessary in this case.
Based on the information that we had received from Miss Blackburn, our assumption of that investigation and as well as our interview of David Arvizo, that was the decision I made, yes.
Just by the way, this may not be significant, but evidently there's a Sergeant Koopman. I do that all the time, I'm sorry. A Sergeant Koopman who was supposed to sign off on some of these reports in this case, and you signed your name over his typed name. Are you aware of that?
Sergeant Koopmans replaced Sergeant Legault around the July time period.
I see.
He was also on vacation when this began.
Alright, well, let's go back a little bit, because if I understand your testimony, after this was closed, this case was closed on April the 16th, there's a report, is that correct? April 16th, 2000.
I don't have that report with me, but that's about right.
Okay, and the case was closed, as far as you were concerned, that was it. Is that right?
Yes.
Alright, the same case with the same case number was reopened.
Yes.
In June, is that correct?
I believe it was around that time period, right?
And that's the time that you got a call from Tom Sneddon, Mr. Sneddon, correct?
Yes.
And he told you he had received a telephone call from attorney Larry Feldman, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you speak directly with attorney Larry Feldman yourself?
Yes.
Now, at that time in June, and if you need something to refresh your recollection, but I believe it was about June 13th, does that sound right, or do you need, or is there something you could look at?
I believe that's possibly correct.
Okay, sometime around that. In any event, in June of 2003, can we agree to that?
Yes.
Alright, June of 2003, you received a call from Mr. Sneddon, eventually talked to attorney Larry Feldman, and then you reopened the investigation, correct?
After speaking with Mr. Feldman, no, I made another phone call before I.
To
Dr. Katz.
To Dr. Katz. Okay. So you talked to, and you were aware that Dr. Katz was a forensic psychologist, correct?
A child psychologist, I believe. But.
Were you aware?
A psychologist.
Were you aware he's a forensic psychologist?
I believe that, yes. I believe he was a psychologist, and I believe he specializes in interviewing children, but it's been a long time since I've talked to Dr. Katz.
Well, you know what a forensic psychologist is, correct?
Yes.
Somebody who testifies in court. Somebody who helps prepare cases.
Yes.
Were you aware that he was a forensic psychologist?
Yes.
And you were aware that he had worked with attorney Feldman in the past, or not?
I don't believe I was aware of that when I talked to Dr. Katz initially. I know that now.
Eventually you found that out, alright. So attorney Feldman, Dr. Katz, Mr. Sneddon, not in that order, but you have those phone calls, and then you reopen your investigation, is that correct?
Yes.
And you use the same case number, correct?
I believe we did.
Now, why didn't you just call Detective Flaa and tell him, your case is reopened? New things have come up. Let's investigate.
Detective Flaa was no longer working for us. He had left our agency.
You believe he left your agency at that time?
Well, excuse me, I'm sorry. He had left my bureau and went to work for special operations.
Now, it's very common when somebody leaves a particular bureau or assignment, if a big case they're working on reopens, it's very common to bring that officer back or that detective back to continue with the investigation, is it not?
Well, it depends on how much investigation had occurred up to that point.
Is it common or not, sir? It's common, isn't it?
Well, no.
Never happens. Sometimes happens.
Sometimes happens.
Alright, and Sergeant Legault was replaced by Sergeant Robel, is that correct?
On this investigation?
Yes. When you reopened it?
Well, he wasn't. He was made the lead investigator of this agency. Of this, Sergeant Koopmans basically had replaced Sergeant Legault.
So you brought a sergeant in, Sergeant Robel?
Yes.
Okay. The prior lineup was you, Sergeant Legault and Detective Flaa, right?
Yes.
And now the lineup was you, Sergeant Koopmans.
Sergeant Koopmans was not involved in this case.
I'm sorry. He replaced Legault or he didn't?
He replaced Legault.
Okay, but he didn't end up. Other than having his name on some things where you signed over it, he really didn't get involved in it, is that right?
That's correct. Sometimes there's an innocuous reason why they'll put. I had investigators working for me out of different offices at times, and sometimes they will just put their sergeant's name as the person reviewing it, even though in our department any superior can review a report.
Okay, but Koopman. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but Koopman's name was actually in there as a sergeant reviewing the report, and then you would sign your name over it.
If I signed my name over it, it doesn't mean that Sergeant Koopmans reviewed the report.
Does that mean you reviewed the report?
Yes.
There you go. In any event, now we have you. We still have Sergeant Legault, or not?
No.
No.
You're talking July 03, right?
Yeah, June, July 03.
No.
Okay, so we had you. Then Sergeant Robel.
Yes.
And then you had Paul Zealous.
Yes.
And Paul Zealous was the detective who really took over Detective Flaa's role in this, did he not?
No, actually I believe Sergeant Robel took over that role.
Alright, and Detective Zealous was not as experienced a detective as some of the other people you had working under you was.
That's an accurate description.
He had been a deputy marshal, is that right?
He had been a deputy marshal before, yes.
Deputy marshals were the bailiffs for the municipal court when we used to have municipal courts here.
Yes.
And then when we consolidated the courts into Superior Court, the marshals, many of them, became sheriffs, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's how he became a sheriff?
Yes.
Alright, and Detective Zealous was the one who... We don't want to go into a lot of detail here, but Detective Zealous was the detective who did a lot of the interviews, is that correct, in this case?
He participated in those interviews with Sergeant Robel.
And he's the one who is the declarant, or the affiant, for the search warrants. He did a big, long, 80-page affidavit to get search warrants.
He is the affiant of the search warrant. Of the primary search warrant, I should say.
He was at the search at Neverland.
He was one of many, yes.
Alright, I have no further questions.
Nor do I, Your Honor.
You may step down. Call your next witness.
Sergeant Robel, would you take the stand, please?
Sergeant Robel, you're already under oath, so when you get to the witness stand, you may be seated.
Thank you.
Sergeant Robel, you've been previously sworn, and you understand you're still under oath.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, first of all, let's go back a little bit, because we're going to broaden the scope of your testimony just a little bit. Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury a little bit about your background and preparation for becoming a deputy sheriff?
Sure. Approximately 22 years ago, I went to the Ventura Academy.
I'm sorry, but we're going to have to tell you what we did all the other kids in the case. Speak into it, please.
Approximately 22 ago I went to the police academy down in Ventura. And it was approximately 15 weeks long. I was then placed in Solvang, Santa Ynez, where I worked as a deputy on patrol and worked my way up. I was the DARE officer and school resource officer. And then I went on into detectives. And during that time in detectives, I was specializing in sexual assault and child abuse cases.
Alright, let's stop there for just a second. How long did you actually work in the specialty of child abuse and sexual assault cases for children?
Approximately 5 years.
Now, did you have any special training or preparation for that role as a detective on those kinds of sensitive cases?
Yes, I have.
Alright, would you explain that to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please?
Yes, I've had numerous hours of education through forensic interviewing, which was approximately 80 hours. Child abuse and recognition training, which was approximately 40 hours. I ended up actually giving some training courses in forensic interviewing classes, assisting other agencies in that respect. I've also, excuse me just for a second. I got to refer to my notes here. Interviewing, child abuse interviewing techniques with children, and also an 80-hour sexual assault investigation course.
Your Honor, I'm going to object for a moment to the witness interviewing, his notes, and I don't think there was a basis for it, but also I don't believe I've seen those notes. If I could have an opportunity to look at them, I would appreciate it.
All right, you may approach the witness.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your objection was he was looking at notes without
an adequate foundation.
Without a foundation. Is that objection still being made after looking at the notes?
Well, I'll withdraw it as to that question, but I would in the future make the same objection.
All right. Did we finish that question?
I believe I did. Were you finished telling them about your training and expertise in that area?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Sergeant Robel, at some point in time were you assigned as the lead investigator into the case against the defendant in this case, Michael Jackson?
Yes, I was.
And approximately, if you recall, what time was it that you were assigned that particular responsibility?
I want to say I believe it was around the 20th or so of June of 2003.
Now, at that time, who was the person that you were reporting directly to?
That was Lieutenant Jeff Klapakis.
The previous witness.
Correct.
And was Paul Zealous, Detective Zealous, a part of that particular investigative team?
Yes, he was.
And did he work under your supervision?
Correct.
Now, at some point did you participate in an interview of the members of the Arvizo family?
Yes, I did.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when was the first occasion that you interviewed the Arvizo family?
I believe it was on July 7 of 2003.
Now, when I said, members of the Arvizo family, what individuals within that family do you recall having interviews with?
Janet Arvizo, Star Arvizo, Gavin Arvizo, and Develin Arvizo.
Now, the ladies and gentlemen of the jury have heard testimony previously this morning. Actually, I guess you have too. Most of the time you were here, about the fact that there was a report that Detective Flaa had obtained about the interview between the Los Angeles social workers and the Arvizo family. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Now, prior to the time that you interviewed the family in July of 2003, were you familiar with the contents of that report?
I was familiar with Detective Flaa's report. I read that, and also Detective Zealous's phone review of Dr. Katz.
So you were familiar with both of those before you actually interviewed the family?
Correct.
And were you familiar with the fact that as a result of the interview with the Los Angeles social workers back on February 20 of 2003, that your department had conducted an initial investigation?
Yes. After reading the report, I did conclude that, yes.
And that it had been closed?
Correct.
Now, did you conduct an interview with, or when did you conduct the first interview that you had with Star Arvizo? Do you recall exactly what date that was?
I believe it was Monday, July 7.
Do you recall where that was?
2003. That was conducted in Santa Barbara County, at our common interview place in Santa Barbara.
So would that be in the south part of the county?
That is correct.
Was that interview tape recorded, or videotape recorded?
Yes, it was.
And was a transcription of that tape recording made?
Yes.
And you've had a chance to review both of those?
Correct.
Now, with regard to Star Arvizo's interview, okay.
Yes.
During the course of that interview, how many incidents did Star tell you in which he was standing on the stairs that he saw Michael Jackson molest his brother Gavin?
2.
During that interview on July 7 of 2003, did Star make statements to you about describing a third incident that he had seen involving the defendant, Michael Jackson, and his brother Gavin?
Yes, he did.
And what did he say in that connection?
He told me.
Objection. Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor, it's a prior consistent statement. It's admissible under the Evidence Code. Counsel has, I won't say anything else, but
Let me think for a moment.
Yeah.
Counsel approach, please. Discussion held off the record at sidebar. All right. The objection is overruled. You may.
Okay. Let's go back just a second, Sergeant Robel. You had a videotaped conversation with Star Arvizo on July 7 of 2003, correct?
Correct.
And in that conversation, Star Arvizo indicated to you that he had seen two incidents while standing on the stairwell where he saw the defendant, Michael Jackson, molest his brother Gavin, correct?
That's correct.
Now, during the course of that conversation, did Star Arvizo relate to you a third incident in which he had seen the defendant in this case, Michael Jackson, touch his brother inappropriately?
Yes, he did.
All right. Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what he told you?
Star told me that when he was up in Michael's bedroom, he was lying on what he described as a couch-type setting, possibly a futon, and he pretended like he was sleeping. And Michael came up into the bedroom and crawled into bed where his brother Gavin was sleeping. And when he got into bed, he scooted up next to him, Mr. Jackson did, to Gavin, and started moving back and forth. And Star observed that, and he basically pretended like he was sleeping at that time.
Now, during the time that you were doing these interviews, did you also have an interview with Gavin Arvizo?
Yes, I did.
And what date did that occur?
That would also have been on Monday, July 7, 2003.
And would that have been at the same location?
Yes, it was.
And during this conversation, who else was present besides you and Gavin?
It would have been Detective Zealous.
And with regard to the previous interview with Starr, was Detective Zealous present then also?
That is correct.
Now, in the conversation that you had with Gavin Arvizo on the 7th of July of 2003, did Gavin, Sorry, counsel.
That's all right.
Did Gavin Arvizo indicate to you the time frame as to when he thought that he had been molested by the defendant in this case, Mr. Jackson?
Yes, he did.
And what did he tell you?
He told me it was towards the end of his stay at Neverland.
Now, after that interview on July 7, did you have another interview with Gavin Arvizo?
Yes, I did.
And when did that occur?
I believe that was August 13 of 2003.
And in that interview, did the subject of the timing of when Mr. Jackson molested him come up?
Yes, it did.
And what did he indicate to you on that occasion?
Again, he stated that it was towards the end of his stay at Neverland.
Alright, let's shift gears here for a second. I need to grab some water. Okay. In November of 2003, you were part of a number of people who executed a search warrant on Neverland Valley Ranch, correct?
That is correct.
And do you remember what date that was?
I believe it was November 18, 2003.
And were you, as the lead investigator, involved in overseeing the preparation of the affidavit in support of the search warrant that was eventually submitted to the judge to get authorization for that search warrant?
Yes, I was.
And in that connection, did you have a recommendation or a desire with regard to how long you thought the search of the ranch would take?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to object. Relevance. His state of mind.
Well, the objection sustained. Because you said, recommendation or a desire.
Okay, I'll rephrase it. It's compound. With regard to the length of the time that you thought that the search would take at Neverland Valley Ranch, what was your desire with regard to requesting judicial authorization as to the timeframe?
I'm going to object again. Relevance.
Overruled. I'm going to. Desire is the word that bothers me here. If you had a recommendation, that's what I would like to hear, as opposed to his private desires.
Well, okay, it's probably a bad choice of words, then. In your conversations, let me ask you this. Who was the attorney you were dealing with in the preparation of the affidavit for the search warrant?
It would have been Tom Sneddon.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. And in the course of working with me on that document, the affidavit in support of the search warrant, did you have a recommendation that you made with regard to the length of time that you wanted to be on the ranch to execute that warrant?
Objection. Calls for hearsay and relevance.
Well, what is the relevance, counsel?
Judge, the relevance is the amount of people that it took to do it, because.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
What was your request and recommendation?
I was requesting that we have authorization to be on the ranch for 2 to 3 days.
And was that request granted?
No, it was not.
Who denied it?
You did.
And what did I tell you in that connection?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that. That calls for hearsay, and I'm going to move to strike the prior questions and answers on the ground that this is not relevant.
The objection as to hearsay is sustained.
All right. In any case, when the warrant went to the judge for signature, the warrant provided for how long that you could be on the property.
I believe it was approximately 24 hours or till midnight, I believe, of that day.
Midnight of the day you executed it.
Correct. I believe it was midnight we had to be out.
What was the impact of the shorter time frame than you requested on the decisions of how the warrant was executed on the ranch that day?
Well, it caused us to reevaluate our initial plan and how many personnel that we were going to take onto the ranch, which in turn caused us to bring more personnel in order to get the job done within the parameters of time that we were designated.
Now, do you know an attorney by the name of Jerry Franklin?
Yes, I do.
Who's Mr. Franklin?
He's a senior deputy DA with Santa Barbara County.
Was Mr. Franklin on the ranch that day, the day that the warrant was executed?
Yes, he was.
And did you, in your capacity as the lead investigator, have some interactions with Mr. Franklin that day?
Yes, I did.
And in what connection was that?
On 2 separate occasions, he assisted me in doing an addendum to a search warrant in the Los Angeles area, and also I had him assist Detective Zealous on doing an addendum for a search on a certain or particular item on the ranch.
Do you know how long Mr. Franklin was there that day?
I want to say he was approximately there maybe 4 or 5 hours, somewhere along that line.
Now, it's been indicated in the beginning of your testimony that I was on the ranch that day. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall how long I was there or when I left?
I'm going to object. Lack of foundation.
The answer. The objection is overruled. But answer, yes, or, no. Do you recall how long he was there?
Yes.
How long?
I think you left probably around 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
All right, let's take our break.